So I just finished watching the first episode of Sandman, Sleep of the Just, and I really dug it. I didn't like absolutely everything about it, but I feel like I was very pleasantly surprised given that it's an adaptation of Sandman, which seems like something that would be really easy to mess up. I haven't read Sandman in quite a long time, but when I first read it, it was almost exactly 20 years ago. Ouch, when I was in middle school. And I think I read it so many times while I was in middle school and high school that I pretty much have it committed to memory. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I can point out any changes to the plot that I've noticed. Most of which I thought were good. My biggest problem, as I expected from what I'd heard, is that they've kind of toned down all of the horror aspects, and I guess just kind of the way that all of the endless and all the gods and nightmares and magical creatures that are in the comics often just kind of do act so horrible that even though they're the main characters you're following, you are just kind of awed and terrified. I feel like they're gonna make all the characters nicer and more relatable, which I don't really love. The initial oh, I should have done this earlier. Let me see if I can find this. When I was little, I used to have the the book The Sandman Companion, which explained everything about Sandman to me. Yes, here it is. So the initial ad for Sandman was this I will show you terror in a handful of dust, and it was intended to be a horror comic. So basically the first volume of Sandman especially is kind of the most horrific and disturbing and scary, and then as it goes on it kind of changes genre, and it's not quite as scary or as focused on horror and gore and stuff like that anymore. And I guess, if you've read something a lot of times, you kind of just enjoy that work for what it is. And I personally like the fact that Sandman starts out that way because I haven't known it any other way. So watching this, I can imagine that maybe they've tried to tone down that aspect of it to make it more cohesive, since obviously now, it's not Neil Gaiman starting from the beginning and just kind of going wherever it takes him. They know, they can try to make it a little more cohesive and more of the same genre all the way through. But I don't like that. I wish they had kept certain things. Anyway, I'll do a recap because I always enjoy recaps when I'm watching and reading reviews. So basically it's about Charles Dance playing the same character that he's played as long as I can remember, an evil rich guy. And his name is Roderick Burgess, and he decides to try to capture death using a Crowley-esque magic situation, but he's unaware that there's actually 7 entities called the Endless, including death, but all starting with D, and all different aspects of existence, including despair, desire, delirium. And it's funny, I think if I had never read Sandman before, I would think that this is a very cheesy concept, but for some reason, reading the comics, you never think that. But anyway, so he ends up realizing that he's actually captured Dream instead of Death, and being just kind of a shitty, evil guy who in a way is kind of dumb, just keeps sort of being well, if you do something for me, and make me immortal or eternally young, or give me endless power or something, then I'll let you go. And Dream just is totally non-responsive to him. I enjoy that aspect a lot, that Dream is just totally unresponsive to everyone who tries to talk to him while he's captured. That makes it a little bit more spooky, I think. So yeah, he basically just captures him and just keeps him in his basement forever. So he it gets to be the perspective of his son Alex, who obviously kind of hates his dad, but at the same time just kind of goes along with this because it starts from the time that he's a kid, and he doesn't really know how to question the fact that his dad captured an all-powerful entity and is keeping him in the cellar, and that's obviously wrong, but that's just kind of his life. Meanwhile, his dad gets in a relationship with a woman named Ethel, and when he tries to force her to abort their kid, she steals all of the different magic artifacts that Roderick had taken off of Dream and was keeping in a safe. And so basically, Alex starts to feel more and more guilt about Dream being kept in the cellar. His dad dies. Alex gets in a relationship with a guy named Paul who works at their house. And Paul also is like, I don't think you should keep this entity in the basement. And somewhat hilariously, there's like a huge time skip, and like where Alex and Paul were like 18, it suddenly switches to them being like, sorry, I just got a little startled by some like knocking. Even though my neighbors seem to knock on things constantly, it still spooks me. So then it kind of switches to the two of them being like 70 years old and literally in the exact same position where Paul is like, Alex, I think you should let him go. Alex is like refusing to do it because Dream won't like give him any sort of sign that he won't be punished or attacked or harmed if he lets him go. Which I kind of like that dynamic. I think just like the whole dynamic of like, even though Dream is like sort of at their mercy, the fact that he is kind of like non-responsive and like just stares at them and won't really give them anything, just makes him kind of like scary in his own way because he has so much power just by not responding. So basically he does get out. I think Paul, Alex's partner, kind of sneakily makes it possible for him to get out, and so he escapes, makes Alex have eternal sleep, which is really lame, I'll get into that, and returns to his kingdom only to find that basically all of his servants have left and it's just kind of turned into dust because he wasn't there. Oh, and also a lot of people had sleep problems because he wasn't there. Also sounds a little corny. So yeah, overall I really like this. I thought they did a really good job adapting it and also kind of like expanding on certain things. I will say this is one of the issues I probably remember less well from when I was a kid, but I do remember Alex being kind of a tragic character in that, like, you know, he wasn't like the person who initiated this harm, but he was like a bit of a coward and like didn't stand up to his dad enough, and you know, he ultimately is punished. My big complaint is in the comic he is punished in a way that as a kid I thought was the scariest thing in the entire series, which is that he's put into like a nightmare where he constantly thinks he's waking up and being comforted by someone, but then something silly but scary happens. It's kind of like very EC, I guess, where like their face starts melting, their head like pops off of their body and starts like bouncing away, and they just kind of like taunt him. Maybe this like wouldn't have been scary in a TV show. Maybe people would have thought it was too corny, but like for me, things that are like a little scary, like but silly looking, like Junji Ito, like, I'm sorry, I probably like totally fucked up his name, and I don't like when people like don't know how to pronounce somebody's name, but I didn't know that I was gonna reference him. You know, that guy. Like when things are like silly looking, like I tend to find them scarier, and I found that whole sequence in the comics where Alex is waking up again and again, and just like everyone who's talking to him just like melts like a candle, to be terrifying. And so the implication is that for the rest of his life Alex is going to be asleep and keep having this terrifying dream where he thinks he's waking up and being comforted by his partner or by somebody else, and they will just turn into a monster and taunt him. I think it scared me as a kid because I was like, well, like that theoretically could happen every time you go to sleep. You don't know that like that's not going to happen to you forever. So anyway, they've completely taken that out. I was like dreading it for the whole episode because I thought it's the scariest thing in the whole series, and instead Dream just makes him go to eternal sleep. So it's like, okay, I guess it's sad because he goes into a coma, but it's like not that bad. Like, I think what is kind of so horrifying and tragic about the original issue in the comics is the fact that, you know, Alex is just kind of this very passive character who just kind of was a coward, like wanted to do the right thing but was too much of a wimp, and then like he's punished in this like sort of like infinitely horrific way, And it's like, maybe it's unfair. And I think that kind of like starts you off on the right foot of seeing like the endless as, you know, so scary and inhuman, because, you know, they'll punish you in such an infinitely terrifying way for just being kind of a shitty person. Uh, so yeah, I find that really disappointing actually, and I have a feeling that like I'm just gonna keep complaining about something like that every episode, because I don't know why they would take that out. But I did really like the changes to introducing certain characters earlier or giving them a bigger role. Um, in the comics, I can't remember if there's like a specific thing that Dream was doing when he was captured by Burgess, but in this, they make it that he's trying to capture the Corinthian, who is kind of a minor-ish villain later on in the next book. So I like that introduction, and I like that they made Ethel a bigger character. As I recall in the comics, Burgess just kind of gives her the sand, and it's just kind of one of like kind of a montage showing how different people get Dreams different things, and he then has to go on kind of a cheesy quest to get all of his things back throughout the rest of the volume, which I assume is what's going to happen in the next episodes. But so I like that she was kind of made into like a character with more agency, and she actually stole all of those things. Cool. In general, I just kind of like that since it wasn't a comic, they were able to kind of like develop and focus on the characters a little bit more. It's funny because I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure in the comic you don't really see Alex and Paul get together. You just kind of find out that at some point they've gotten together. And like, because you see them throughout their whole lives. And I actually think like, for some reason it actually seemed like a little bit more cheesy in the show, because they kind of get together in a really forced way, and then it like cuts to them as old men, and it's like, wow, I can't believe Paul like didn't break up with Alex, even though he like disapproves of Alex keeping like an entity in the cellar. So a little bit cheesy, but I think the focus on Alex's character is really good. He's a really tragic character. Is that my whole review? I know there's been a couple of things that, I don't know, dude bros. Are there really dude bros who like Sandman? Because I feel like, despite some aspects of Sandman, like not having aged well and like being offensive today, I do think like it was always pretty good-hearted in an attempt to like portray like a lot of very diverse characters. So I don't know how many like extreme like anti-leftist dude bros are like into Sandman, but if there are, they're probably a little bit fussed because they've like gender bent and like race bent some of the characters. I'm just trying to say like Lucian the librarian is hot now. So yeah, I'm basically really enjoying it. I'm excited to see more, but I'm just frustrated that they've like taken out some of like the biggest horror aspects that I found to be very memorable as a kid. But I feel like they're doing a good job. It's nice to watch an adaptation of something that is very beloved and kind of hard to adapt and not be like, oh, this is terrible, they ruined it. Like, nope, it's a pretty good adaptation, and I'm probably about to start the second one.